This isn't going to make sense without the first part, in which I tried to establish that plays aren't objectively good or bad, they're just judged relative to what we consider standard. So watch that if you haven't. But now the question is, how should you judge your own play? Like, what standard should you hold it to? And people make posts asking about this occasionally, like, what's considered a good level of player? Am I good when I hit gold or diamond or challenger or whatever? So hopefully, if the last part was right, the question is, what should you compare your play to consider it good or bad? And there are people who say, like, unless you're like master or challenger or some other like ridiculously high standard, you're trash. But I mean, while it's good to compare your play to a high level and look at all the mistakes you're making, the fact that you need to look at your mistakes to fix them and improve doesn't necessarily mean that you should use that insanely high level of play to decide if you're playing well or not. Like, for one thing, it would be pretty depressing for the vast majority to be compared to such a high standard. But also, it would be pretty meaningless. Like, comparing silver or plat play to challenger just doesn't make sense. They're so far apart and so different. You're basically guaranteed to be terrible by that standard no matter what, so it's a pretty useless standard. Like, you could go from silver to gold in a day and it wouldn't matter. You wouldn't even notice compared to a challenger standard. So, here's what I think the standard you should use to judge yourself is, in a quote from Hemingway. There is nothing noble in being superior to your fellow man. True nobility is being superior to your former self. So, in other words, you should compare your play to your own play yesterday. If it's better, it's good. If it's worse, it's bad. And I think this is a good mentality for solo queue because the only person you should care about is yourself. Plus, it's a lot healthier than comparing yourself to other people, because if you do that, your own like self-image is entirely dependent on who you compare yourself to. Like, you could be a gold player in a world of silver players and feel good about your own play, but then if they became plat, suddenly how you feel about your play has changed, even though your play itself hasn't. Um, but the obvious objection to this is, if you look at most players, they tend to be very competitive. Like, pros definitely care about being better than other pros. But if what I was saying was true, then it seems like they wouldn't have that competitive aspect or the drive to be better than other people. So my answer to this is that other people are a sort of indicator you can use to measure and inspire your own progress. For example, I think in cross country, the person you really race against is yourself, and you're trying to push yourself harder and break your own personal records. But you definitely don't ignore other people. Like, it's actually helpful that there are other people in the race because, even though the main person you're racing against is yourself, if there's someone else like a few seconds ahead of you, it's helpful if you say, okay, he's human, I've trained as much as he has, like, if he can do it, there's no reason I shouldn't also be able to run that fast. So, similarly for League, if you see someone play a champion to a really high level, it's like, okay, there's no reason I shouldn't be able to do what they do and win games they would win. But the person you're competing with, and like judging yourself relative to, is still yourself. Like, other people are helpful to prove that you have room to grow and even to show how to do it, but the level you're judging your play relative to is still your own play yesterday.